think we shall make a start. So welcome everyone to our Sooner Safer Happier December meetup. I'm Anne Gambles. I'm here with Kate Mulligan and Jacques Berend of the Sooner Safer Happier EMEA co-leadership team. Unfortunately, Dean Lashana can't be with us today, but ordinarily he'd be here too. And yeah, we're very pleased to welcome today Miles Ogilvie and Tony Caink with a session on speed and safety rewiring risk and control. And I think without further ado, I will hand over to the two of you, if that's okay.
Wonderful. Thanks, Anne. Absolutely. And just as we get started, I'm interested just to learn a little bit about the audience. And I don't know if you might post in the chat what roles you're currently in, if there's any specific governance, compliance or safety type roles you are occupying, or any particular questions you're seeking to get answered. It's useful for me and Tony just to see that. We've got a few slides that we are hoping to talk through. It takes about 20 minutes, and then we were intending to open up for questions, but we've got a really small group here, so I kind of think if you're happy, Tony, we ask questions as we go, and no need to hold on. I won't be able to see the questions on my screen when I'm sharing, so thanks, Jonathan. Great. Maybe if Kate or Tony, you could put your hand up if questions emerge, that would be useful. Thank you. Okay, with that, I'm just going to share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, so as Anne mentioned, my name is Miles Ogilvie. I work at Sooner Safer Happier, which is a advisory community and consulting organization. And I'm here today to talk about governance, risk and compliance with my colleague, Tony. Tony, do you want to say a word?
Yes, hello. Also work along with Sooner Safer Happier with multiple different organizations on this topic.
Fantastic, thanks. And I love this topic, and we're talking today about this topic because it's a ninja move in organizations to help improve flow. And when CIOs I talk to say agile teams all slow down to the same speed as everyone else when they hit the control gates, that's an indication that your current governance process is maybe not working for you, because it's actually introducing survival risk. It's introducing market risk in your organization. You're not able to move at the speed the market is now demanding, and not able to accelerate, which your business needs to. And when a CAO, Chief Audit Officer, says to me, our group standards haven't kept up with the changes to our delivery approach recently, well, that tells me that you are successfully accelerating. Great, you're managing your market risk. However, you're introducing safety risk in your organization because your group standards are being bypassed to enable that. They're not keeping up. So neither of those things are good, and your policies and standards are the code of how your organization works, and it needs to work for you, not against you. Key message that I'd like you to take away from today is, if you want to go fast, if you want your organization to be able to accelerate, then you really need to have strong brakes so that you can maintain a safety environment around that. Now, in the context of change, and we're talking change, organizational change today, and change initiatives, what form do those brakes, the strong brakes, take? We'll be talking about cultural brakes, which have operating model and people implications, and process, data and tool implications. So culture, operating model and process, these are the forms of brakes that we're talking about, and we're saying these things need to work for you and need to be strong. So let's get into it. First off, who remembers this image? Does anyone on the call recall what this is, where it is?
Deepwater Horizon?
Absolutely, well done. Yeah, thank you. So 15 years ago, This was a tragedy that struck in the Gulf of Mexico. On the day this happened, executives were on the rig celebrating 7 years without any fatalities. And the investigation after the disaster looked at, was this a safe rig? And that's, there were just some exceptional, totally unforeseeable circumstances that led to the disaster. Or actually, was it not that? Was it the opposite? There were no incidents being flagged on the rig for the previous 7 years because incidents were not being reported, because bad news was being buried, and the emphasis was deliver, deliver, deliver. Don't let anything else get in the way. And so when problems were not fixed, systemic weaknesses built up, so that when a issue did happen, the implication was far worse than it needed to be. And that's what the conclusion was of the investigation. This was actually not a safe rig. The culture was wrong. The culture was go fast, hit the milestone, achieve the deadline. It was speed without control. And sadly, this isn't unique. I mean, I could have used the image here of a space shuttle, of grounded fleets of Boeing aircraft, of a submarine that imploded recently. Those stories of the wrong culture and speed without control are not unusual. And it's not just in safety critical industries that produce photographs like this. Data leaks are the new oil spills, and we see enough massive breaches and issues, security breaches in major organizations of all types, government organizations, financial services organizations, others, often associated with big regulatory fines now. But the root cause often lies in a cultural issue of speed without control, deadlines that need to be met, milestone-driven behavior. So this is what I mean by culture. And let's talk a little bit about that. So what is it that keeps you safe? What is culturally the thing that we need to be thinking about when we talk about breaks? Sydney Decker is a professor of safety science in Brisbane, Australia, and he's gone deep on this. And he's worked in a number of different industries. In healthcare, he worked with a hospital team to understand why things were going wrong and why operations were failing. And let's be clear, what we mean is where the patient died. With the team at the hospital sampled a number of operations where that happened, and they tried to identify the root causes. And as happens with many investigations like this, the root causes came up as, well, there were human errors, process wasn't followed, there were deviations there from what should have happened. So therefore, unfortunately, there was a problem. The emphasis here is people are the problem, and workers who don't follow the instructions cause those problems. And that is an industrial mindset, that the right thing to do was known, and the problem was people not doing the right thing. And if you are mass producing widgets in the 1900s, fine, that works. But if you're in a complex situation, such as a hospital, or in a modern day digital context where things are unpredictable, well, following instructions isn't what you necessarily need. So what this particular investigation went on to do was to look at operations that also succeeded. What they found was the same thing, that actually there were still processes not followed, there were still human errors, but what was present where the operation succeeded was the ability to say stop, was equality of voice, was curiosity and open-mindedness across the team. And so these are cultural factors. And I know that you on this call, in this community, will have read Amy Edmondson or been aware of psychological safety and her writings on that. This is the same thing. You may not, though, have thought previously about how important psychological safety is in keeping your organization and your customers actually safe. So if you want to go fast and stay safe, first message is it's 80% culture and 20% process. Tony, what's next?
Thanks, Miles. I'm just going to experiment with the taking control button and see if that works. So if not, it'll be one of those next slide, please type situations. We'll see how that works. So interestingly, even though we all acknowledge, and we would readily acknowledge, that the culture is the #1 thing that we need to be working on, people, when we have this conversation, pretty quickly though want to know about the operating model and the process, and you know, how do those things work. So we will cover those things, but what we need to be aware of when we're designing the operating model or the process that we're going to use is what nudges are we giving to the culture. You know, are we actually getting the right the right results from that design. So I'm just going to see if that works. Miles, I don't think it is working. You might have to do the next slide, please, for me.
Sorry, I'm just trying to see if I can do that. It's asking me to do some weird stuff on my... Yeah, I think I'm going to have to control the slides for you.
Okay. So this is the typical situation in the risk community in a larger organization. So what we've found is that when you are a risk, you have a career in risk, might be the right way to say this, that you start to specialize in different areas of risk. And in fact, it's, you know, like with all career paths, the more specialist you become, the better that is for you personally. So there's a kind of incentive to break up into different separate specialisms within the general area of risk. And each of those might even be reinforced by different certification requirements. Industry standards start to emerge on these different concerns as well. So working with real organizations, we found that in larger organizations, they end up with quite a lot of separate teams, genuine teams. So, you know, just to rattle off some of the ones that we've seen recently. So we see organizations that have got a security architecture team, security assurance, separate to that, data governance and data privacy, 2 separate things apparently, fraud, compliance, third-party risk, technical risk, service transition, service management, enterprise architecture. And you can see all of those things in one organization at the same time. So in very large organizations, you know, think of a couple of examples, somewhere between 7 and 11 different teams, each with a head of, each with, you know, a team underneath them of tens or maybe even dozens or even hundreds in some cases for very large organizations of risk specialists on these different specialisms. So that also creates a problem for a team that's trying to deliver value. If you're a product team, you're trying to deliver, and now you're confronted with 7 or 11 different teams that you need to engage with to get permission from, if you like, or agreement or approval from. And how you do engage with them, well, that varies a lot. You know, you might send an email off to a group email box, or fill in some questionnaires on SharePoint, or fill in this spreadsheet, that template or something like this. So each of the 7 or 11 teams might have a different model. And then you're waiting in a queue, hoping to get some service to get a conversation with those people. And then after you even meet them, then there's maybe even more questions and questionnaires and paperwork to fill out to actually assess the risk of the piece of work you're doing. So we see that that's quite a lot of friction that is generated for a team. When you look at it from the point of view of each of these specialist teams, they think their process is nice and simple. You just send an email and we'll respond. But it's when someone has to jump through the hoops of all of these different concerns, they are the ones that feel the pain of the complexity trying to get something evaluated for risk and then out into production and into the hands of users. So what do we do instead? So let's have a look at the next little animation there, Miles. We've got a pattern that we've discovered that works nicely is to create cross-functional teams across these safety areas. And obviously that takes some support and leadership from the people involved and a bit of salesmanship to get started. And these are just like agile teams. They're cross-functional teams. Cross-functionality is the secret sauce. So we want to bring together these people. Now, we don't bring them together in the line management sense, just like you don't need to do that in an agile team either. These are cross-functional. They remain in their specialist areas, but coming together with representatives from each to make a virtual safety team that is super valuable. And then the people inside those safety teams, as they start to do work together and evaluate risk together, they start to realize the overlaps between their different concerns and how they can help one another. In fact, I've got just an example of an organization I'm working with at the moment. Their data privacy function is new and small and somewhat stretched. But what they did they did buy in straight away to working along with the safety team model. What they realized there was that a lot of the data privacy concerns are met if there is good cybersecurity, for example. So they were able to lean in and have the cybersecurity folk reinforce those standards and therefore help. And they found that then, of course, inside the safety teams, architecture was quite strong at this organization, with solution architects out there engaging with all of the different delivery teams. So there was a channel of communication and being able to educate the teams on the data privacy standards. So by working together as a cross-functional team in safety, suddenly they're able to help one another a lot, and their workload actually reduces and their efficiency improves. And then what are they going to do? Let's have a look at the next slide. So we've got some safety teams. Who are they going to talk to? Well, they're engaged or lined up, if you like, or built into a relationship with those that are doing delivery. I've used the term value stream here, but you might call them product teams or squads or fleets, or my goodness, all the different terminology that comes out for a product delivery team. So this one is showing it at scale. It might be that you've only got small teams, small squads that are able to deliver a whole product, or it might be that some products some platforms are very large and there's several teams involved, and there's a leadership trio is a sort of common pattern that we see when people are working in a product-oriented sense. So this works best in a product-oriented sense because on the value stream side, the delivery team is taking long-term stewardship of their platform, their business capability, and all the work that they're doing for it. And if they're aligned to a safety team that's cross-functional, they're able to build a long-term relationship with them. So that will help them to align their goals for a start. The leadership team in the value stream, if there is a leadership trio there and they are able to extend that, have an extended leadership team with the safety folk, can help them to gain the same outcomes or the same objectives working together. So instead of it being that the safety team's role is to say no and to keep us all safe, they realize the business outcomes of the value stream and start to realize, okay, this is what the business strategy is. We want to help you achieve that in a safe manner. So how do we work together? So that's an important model that takes obviously some time to build. So that's operating model, and in a moment we'll cover like exactly what happens in those conversations between the safety team and the teams doing delivery, the product teams. So as we move on to process now, perhaps Miles has got a nice little story there about the as-is situation. What's the typical, taking a bit of a black hat view, what's the typical as-is situation for process?
Thanks. So this little box is representing your annual project that many organizations have, and there's a bunch of stage gates that your project goes through to get started, and those stage gates might have you have to pass through various different specialists to get approval, and then there might be sprints written 10 times in the middle because that's what the organization thinks if you're may be needed. And then there's got a bunch of siloed gates at the end in order to actually get the thing into customers' hands. So what this leads to is a predetermined upfront solution. Based on the upfront solution, there's some upfront risk assessments, but that is at the point that there is least actually known about what really can and will be built and what really is going to be useful. So anyway, what that is gets built. Eventually something gets deployed, but at that stage, then there is a discovery of what actually wasn't possible in time, how actually what's been built was completely different to the original plan, all the risks which then emerge are backloaded, and that will either result in a business forced go live and accepting a bunch of risk or delays. So the example here is when we put a stopwatch on this process in one large organization, navigating all the GRC silos took 3 months elapsed from code complete. So this is just the GRC silos on the right, from code complete to in production took 3 months. And that was 2 months of project management expediting. And that was because of what Tony described, needing to go into all the front doors, go through the process, have all the meetings, do all the chase ups, stand in the queue, go back to the beginning of the queue when you put the wrong information in the queue at the beginning, all that stuff. So it takes time. So that formed, in this case, when we were putting a stopwatch on it, that discovery of just how long it was taking to actually go live on a zero risk Hello World exercise. That allowed us to start to say, aha, there is project management wasted effort going on here for every single release, which is not productive. That creates a business case then, how much wastage is happening amongst our project managers, of whom there were hundreds in that organization. That can form a business case for actually, let's do something about this. Let's try and put a cost on the waste that's happening today and rethink the process and the operating model for tomorrow. Tony.
Lovely, thanks, Miles. So we have set up an operating model then with some safety teams, and what are they going to do? Let's have a look at the next picture there. We've got a product team and we've got a safety team, both virtual cross-functional teams. And what are they going to do? They're going to have a conversation with each other. This is really important. We've facilitated a lot of these conversations, especially the very first kickoff conversation is quite an eye-opening moment for all concerned. The safety team looks at each other and realizes that there's all these different concerns going on. They start to have an appreciation for the experience of the product team, and that's super powerful. Something else happens in the early conversations, if we just get the next point up, is there's an initial, if you like, triage of the risk for this product team. Is this a high risk product, or is it just an internal product that's used internally in the organization, or is it one of our key lines of business? So that tells the safety team just how often do we need to engage with this particular product team, and we get them to record that. Is this that we need to talk to you fortnightly, quarterly? You just do your quarterly planning, or we'll just come back and see you next year in case anything's changed. So setting that frequency explicitly has been really helpful, and that also alleviates the concerns that typically come from the safety team, where they go, oh my goodness, I've got to go and talk to all of these different product teams. Well, you need to talk to some of them often, but some of them you don't need to talk to so often. When they do come together, and especially when there's a material outcome and a material risk that they need to manage together, they start to realize the value of working together. Both the safety team and the different concerns that are there, working alongside that product team is super powerful. So what are they talking about, these conversations? Well, what they're first of all talking about are the business outcomes, that funnel of demand that's coming in to the product team, or that's led by the strategy of the product team. What business outcomes are they going for? So long before any technical design has been done, a conversation about business outcomes is powerful. In fact, Miles, you've got a nice story. Do you want to share that little story about business outcome discussion?
So a quick example, true story, large organization, we were approached by the research team to say we'd like to set up to bring in a bunch of data into the cloud environment and do some analytics on it. It's external data from a vendor, so there's no information security risk associated with that. It's purchased data, and so can you please help us get the cloud environment set up to use some new Amazon services to do that? And in this case, there was because this was the cloud team that we were part of at that stage. That's an innovative team usually in an organization. We had a safety team running to support the cloud rollout activities, and the safety team was immediately partnering with that group and saying, well, okay, let's just figure out what sort of data is that, what's the business intent you've got there. And it turned out that the business intent was mapping footfall in high street stores using mobile phone geolocated data, which was purchased. And what they're going to do was try and predict financial results of high street stores, high street chains, based on footfall movements over time. So some quite interesting sort of financial services modeling, but what they hadn't thought about was the core data set was actually mobile phone data. And so when the data privacy person was saying, well, hang on, will this contain actual mobile phone numbers? Well, yes, obviously it will. Okay, so you could actually put in anyone's known phone number and track their movements over time if you wanted. You know, this is massively confidential information just because it's been purchased, and we absolutely need to obfuscate it from the outset. So that kind of conversation about the business intent allowed quite a different conversation to happen than if this was simply looking at the technology implementation with, you know, in the knowledge of no apparent commercial issues at stake.
And that's a great story, Miles. And so that leads directly on to, having identified a risk like that, what do we do with it? So importantly is to recognize that we want this process to be seamless from the team's normal way of working. So what does a product team normally have? They've got a wiki, perhaps with some of their documentation. They've got a product backlog with the user stories and the requirements that they're building out. There's an important piece of prep work that we get the safety teams to do, which is to create a set of stories, a backlog of stories, if you like, but as a template or as a catalog. And what they do is codify the standards of the organization. So in many of these large organizations, you'll see hundreds of pages of standards on all those different topics we talked about before, on data and cyber and so on and so. Each of those teams will build their standards documentation. What we ask them to do is instead, or as well, create them as standardized user stories. So if we're talking about data obfuscation, you can obviously write that as a user story. Why would the user want their data obfuscated? Now, what would be the benefit of that? And importantly, what's the acceptance criteria that's been done to the standards required? So by having a standardized user story, that can be quite simply added into the team's backlog. It can be tailored, you know, if the team has something specific about their context, the acceptance criteria could be modified, the approach could be modified, the exact pattern they're using can be modified, and it goes into the refinement process of the team. So then we use the term a risk story for that, and it just sits alongside all the user stories in the team's backlog. But at least they're known, they're visible. The other thing you get for free here then is an audit trail for when you are audited that says, and the auditors say, show me evidence that you've managed these risks. There you can fairly easily just do a simple query, pull out all the risk stories from the backlog and see the information about them, both how they were raised, by whom, how they were signed off and evidenced of being tested and so on, just like you'd have with any story. The other important thing about that is the risk stories are a guide. They pull forward those requirements. You know, a lot of what Miles was talking about in the traditional process is the late surprise, isn't it? On the right-hand side, you suddenly at the end, just when you think you're ready to go live, then the requirements start emerging. Whereas this process brings it right to the beginning, even before any design work's done, the risks are being identified and therefore can be mitigated. The final step that's important is then the release. And what we don't do here is ask the risk SMEs and the safety team to sign it off all over again. What we are saying is the risk stories already give the evidence that the team's done the things that they need to do. We've gathered the engagement has already happened with those risk colleagues, and so the product owner signs off the release like they normally would, and they sign off all the risk stories and all the user stories like they normally would. So that's it's really powerful. So that's a simple process, or simple enough that can be done with teams that are using a fairly standard product delivery agile methodology these days. So that's the end there of the process as we've implemented with several clients. And hand back to you, Miles.
Yeah, so it's simple in principle, but as with all things that are simple, it's not necessarily easy to shift how governance, risk and control works in an organization. Again, as I mentioned, you know, this is 20% process, 80% culture. So knowing that you've got the right level of support from the outset, and understanding of the challenges and the need for change is fundamental. So that's been a quick run through of the breaks that we have found are useful, are needed to help you go fast and stay safe. If you want to do this in your organization, 5 key things to get started, just to have a think about. Firstly, there has to be an awareness of why this matters for leaders, the chief risk officers, the various different risk domains to really engage. They need to understand what the challenges are, and sometimes they don't. They may be because they don't necessarily see the impact of delivery delays. So there needs to be a clear awareness of why this matters. You're always going to start small. Start with one safety team, one value stream. Run some experiments. Try and bring them together. Have the right conversations. The process doesn't all need to be deployed at once. You can start with a bit of process and elaborate as needed over time until it's working for you. And as that process does evolve, we know that the tooling side, when Tony says run a quick query, of the risk stories, that's massively powerful and helpful, but you will need a little bit of tooling and dashboarding to help you get started with that. So those are things to get started. And with that, I suggest we open up for Q&A and use the remaining time for covering anything anyone would like to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you, Miles and Tony. Jonathan, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sure. Appreciate you walking through all that. I think, I've leveraged safety teams in the past to kind of help with making sure that whatever we're building is safe and sound. But can you talk a little bit about how you deal with what's already built, right? And so oftentimes in an environment, you might be inheriting processes, or maybe within the context of execution, we're building a process that might be manual, that might be very human-led. And one of the challenges that I navigate often is, hey, we built a procedure, but nobody cares. And because we can't always ensure that it's always being followed. And I was kind of curious for your perspectives around how do you make it easy to do the right thing and harder to do the wrong thing in this context? Because it's solving kind of what we're building, that's pretty easy, like kind of just bring the folks in early and often. But how we address the environmental risk that already exists, would appreciate some perspectives on that.
Sure. And there's a few different things in there that are worth unpacking. In terms of how do you make people do the right thing, the visibility is fundamental. Visibility of where teams are addressing risk stories, where they're not addressing risk stories. Are risk stories being orphaned, abandoned, going stale in the backlogs? If someone from cybersecurity is raising risk stories and agreeing them with the product owner and they're being ignored, that's an issue. Okay, that is a huge, and that's getting visualization. When I mentioned tooling, getting visualization and dashboarding of where are the risks being addressed and where are they not is part of the solution in terms of how do we help people do the right thing. In terms of Tony, I'll hand over to you in just a second.
Yeah.
In terms of your other question, which is what's okay for teams that are getting started, but what about teams that are already, platforms that are already built and they may be 10 years old, 20 years old? Well, that's risk debt. Okay, team, you have tech debt, you have risk debt. And so when onboarding a product team to a process like this, you're going to do it one at a time. There will be an initial engagement with that safety team that will start to look, and they may have never come across this before, because you know what, when I've done this in a large organization, 30% of the tech has never been seen by the safety population before, because it emerged evolutionarily. It didn't emerge through big projects. And so there will be stuff which they haven't engaged with before, and is packed full of risk debt. And so as those things are onboarded, there will be risks being flagged, and they'll take a different view about maybe some high engagement initially, and maybe quite a lot of risk stories being identified initially, and that will take energy to resolve. It's risk debt, and depending on how important it is, there will need to be a mature negotiation with the chief product owners, with the business around how much to prioritize that versus business features. That it is typically you need to build it in over time, but by making those risk stories visible and by making visible where they're not being managed, you can maintain motivation and get people to a clean place. Tony.
Yeah, I was going to, you covered a lot of that on the risk debt point. The other thing there that happens with the risk management teams is they're usually doing some kind of annual or twice a year risk assessment from an operational point of view. They might be operationally reviewing business areas. So helping those people join in with what's going on in the change assessment and treating it as part of the same process is really powerful. So they can, if they're doing an operational risk assessment, they can use the risk stories as the same mechanism. So okay, we just uncovered the risk debt, so use the exact same mechanism to help track it and just make visible the backlog of how much debt is there. So that's the sort of mechanical answer. Doesn't necessarily address the question you raised about how to get people to do the right thing, but visibility is a big start, a big start.
I appreciate the insights, and I do think it covers a lot of it. I think that what I'm also thinking is that stale assets, whether it's a control, a process, or procedure that maybe multiple years old, might be a smell, which may also uncover aspects of risk debt. So creating a good definition of risk debt would allow for the discovery of that work and then allow for its triage. Thanks.
Yeah. Sometimes when we're onboarding people to the process, the uncovering of the risk debt is a surprise. They didn't expect it, and they're like, oh my goodness, we were worried about the change that's going live tomorrow, but actually we just looked backwards and found all this. So it does create a difficulty in the onboarding process, because it means there's a bit of a hill to climb as people come on board. The faster you bring on more and more teams, you're starting to uncover a large amount of work to be done. So planning that in the transition sort of puts a throttle on how fast you can go with onboarding everyone as well, because we start to uncover these historic issues.
Thanks, Jonathan. See, there's a question there from Karen. Thank you, Karen, about the root cause of CROs not understanding. Do you want to add anything to that question, Karen?
No.
Okay. Okay, cool.
Again, it seems like it's, lack of connection between the different operating, entities. But I just thought I'd cast a net for your wisdom, Miles. And
yeah, sure. Thank you. So the problem is we have, in our functionally siloed organizations, that the functional silo in development is to get stuff delivered, and the functional silo in risk is to make all the dashboards green. That's what the incentive is, and the risk dashboards are made to go green. But how they're made to go green isn't necessarily connected with reality. So in one place I was at, the project dashboards that reflected project risk, change risk, showed 98.5% green across 1,000 team organization. We all thought great. It was all fantastic. The small exceptions were being chased down. But when you actually say, okay, how much of our change how many releases connected to projects? Well, then things started unraveling a bit. And it was really hard to get the data out of the systems which were not connected, because you've got dev systems, you've got ops systems, you've got project systems, and they are not all linked. But when you actually we did manage to create the links, and we could see that only 2% of the change that was actually going into production had a connection back to a project that was green. So we had 98% of change that was going out the door, which we really had no idea about. And when that was visible, the CRO actually told us we weren't allowed to have that information, because the regulators would object immediately. We had to delete all evidence that data existed. He said, I don't believe it. And it was true, but that got the CRO's attention. And so why are they not understanding why it matters? Well, I think a CRO doesn't see it as their problem today if delivery is slow. They don't see that as their problem. What they do see, their objective is to turn their dashboards green often, and that doesn't necessarily reflect reality. It reflects the work of their own risk department, whether the dashboards are green often. So yeah, incentive is and that's why pairing the safety team with the value stream, trying to get shared incentive to go fast and stay safe, why we feel that matters.
So, you said it's connected to projects, and then how much of that is connected to business impact?
Well, that's another break, isn't it? In a traditional organization, yes, business impact and projects and dev and ops and risk systems, they're all different systems. They all have different records to show what's happening. And so what really is happening isn't clear. If you start to consolidate this together and create traceability of outcome in the process that Tony showed us, the business outcome that's being discussed by risk, and what we're intentionally doing there is creating a quality record that says this outcome has been discussed by the safety team. That appears in the dashboard. If you know that half the business outcomes that are under, and when I say a business outcome, I mean a record of quarterly intent, an OKR, if you want to call it that in some cases. If a business outcome has not had any conversation at all with the safety team, well, you know you've got some risk in your portfolio. And conversely, if you have positive evidence based on the safety team feedback that all of your business outcomes have had some level of conversation, some initial triage on them, well, you can at least have some confidence that the right conversations are happening and the right things, the right steps are being taken. So yes, traceability to business outcomes, and traceability throughout this process is part of the whole story here. It's not just about risk, because it's also about, do we even know what is actually going into production, and do we have traceability back to the business intent of that thing? And that usually doesn't exist in organizations which haven't thought about this. So
do you have like a case study or something that connects all this to actual what we're going for?
So yeah, absolutely, that is part of what my experiences have been in my role inside. The consultant thing is relatively recent. I've worked inside organizations for many years, and as have Tony. So we are sharing with you tonight experiences of internal, having worked this and created that exact traceability, and we can say so, and also externally more recently with other organizations. So yes, case studies we do. Happy to talk about that in a bit more detail if you wanted, but
maybe you could just pop a link.
The problem, Karen, is that people they may be willing to even talk about these things, but they'll want deniability about the as was situation. So we don't have published case studies that are just like out there in the public domain that we just go ta-da. Okay. We've got some stories to tell, and we can introduce you to some folk who will tell the story verbally, but they may not, for those reasons Miles wrote down. It's rare to see an organization willing to put that in writing and get it out in the public domain. So yeah, not so much in the public domain.
But if you want, if the question was around traceability and an example, so one example of one major financial services organization that put in place traceability, they were using a tool called Rally, which I think became Agile Central, to capture quarterly business outcomes, and that they connected that through to their Jira backlogs, so that epics were fortnightly, monthly epics were connected to their business outcomes in Rally. You could see that, and there was exception reporting where there were epics that were not connected to business outcomes. Stories were connected to epics, and that there was then that we call that the golden thread of connectivity between stories, epics, outcomes, and reporting how many of your stories in your value stream or for your product team, whatever you call them, in your project, how many of your stories, your work items, do not have connectivity to a business outcome. That is a golden thread metric. Jolt does work on this as well for places he works at, I know, and that metric, when you start making that visible to people, that raises other questions. What do you mean 50% of our work is not connected to strategy, is not connected to investment decisions we've taken? That's got nothing to do with risk and compliance. That's just, are we even working on the right stuff, really? So, and that traceability, absolutely, there are examples of different organizations work it in different ways. You can do this in Atlassian fully, you can do it blending different tools, so many options for doing that.
Miles, is the financial services organization that case study anywhere under disguise?
It's in Sooner, Safer, Happier. I think it's all about that. So the one I was talking about there's another one where I know Joel, Tony, and me have worked at more recently, another financial services organization that has a case study, probably the nationwide
Yeah, that's what I
video
was looking for.
Station
draws.
where
So
it's
we
in
have
the
a
public domain. Yeah, that's the public
it's in
domain.
the public. So we in the YouTube channel. That's what I was looking for because we have a lightning talk, and in
Thank
the
you.
lightning talk there was actually the link control was presented there. So let me search and get the link for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Strike me with that lightning talk, and I'll listen to it.
The other, just Karen, worth saying as an assumption that we sometimes forget that we make, is we're usually doing this in a context of an organization that's going after a lean portfolio management model as well. So it be, you know, that traceability back to business outcomes doesn't really work if lean portfolio management isn't an explicit thing that the organization is going. So they usually follow each other. You know, it's often when people are converting from a traditional project management lifecycle into a product lifecycle and into a lean portfolio management, then this becomes the control model that works really well in that context. But yeah, you couldn't just take this process and bolt it on to a traditional waterfall project lifecycle. It just wouldn't work.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Good luck with it. Sounds like you're working or thinking in this space, Karen. Would if you do have other questions, always happy to have a chat offline.
Thanks. I guess I better read the book.
But
it's only you can snip the one chapter, Karen. There's a chapter on safety, so you can skip ahead to the safety chapter if you like.
All right, I'll be the skip ahead girl, and thank you, Zolt, for the lightning talk.
Yeah, so that's for the link control, and so you can watch Tony Caink from 36.49 seconds. That's where he starts, and the golden thread and everything is there. So I'm just putting that information there as well. And then we have another video on the nationwide case study about link control. So I'm gonna find it as well for you.
thanks, Shadow.
Thanks, Zolt. I forgot about those.
Okay, well, thank you for being my golden thread, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
Any other thoughts prompted by tonight's conversation from anyone?
There's a question from Nicole in the chat.
Oh.
Nicole, did you want to elaborate on the question anymore?
Trying to take myself off mute.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you could, I tried to articulate my question. I work now within a less sophisticated industry than financial services, and some of the recommendations here are, I'd say, guided by some systems that are inherently in place in financial institutions, such as enterprise risk programs. But in the case where there's a little bit more, I'll say, risk as a part of change, but no sophisticated risk programs, how do you guide and influence leaders to put some of these systems in place through top of the house to make sure you still have some of those same outcomes?
So in my experience, Nicole, the story that I told about the oil rig and that image can be quite helpful. So when I've gone into organizations and spoken to their executive committee, and that's the first slide in the pack, and the conversation I'm having is what we just did, and the CEO is saying, I don't want to be on the front page. I don't want that to happen around here. That is what we need to not happen. This is why we care about this. You know, if you can get that kind of awareness and a heart from a senior stakeholder, then you've got a tailwind to actually making some change. If you can't get that, if you can't get senior stakeholders to engage on this topic, it will be very hard.
I appreciate that, and thanks for giving me the oil rig as a place to start.
Yeah. People, the good news, I think, in a less sophisticated organization, they're not going to have as many specialisms in the risk community. So, you know, it might just be cyber risk, for example, might be the prominent one. And so, you know, if you just can solve for that can be the thin edge of the wedge for the overall process, you know, getting cyber and change to talk together, for example.
Exactly right.
In one, we were working one place, and they asked to look into safety teams, and they only had one control domain, which was cyber. And I said, why do you need a whole safety team if you've only got a cyber governance function. And they said, well, yeah, but it's not one. We've got IT security, we've got information security, we've got security architects, we've got security operations, and they're all in different teams and they all give different answers to our product teams. And so we've still got 5 different front doors. So we want the safety team to connect our cyber folk together and give one version of the truth to our product team. So, you adapt the model to suit the circumstance.
Yes, this feels eerily familiar. Thank you.
If I could inject another recommendation. So in a former life where I was leading engineering at a very large medical supply chain company, I was embarrassed when a project got to production but had not gone through compliance reviews and needed to get rewritten. And so I pulled my risk partners in at inception to basically prevent a recurrence. I then compelled them and says, we need to be able to do this fast or it won't be helpful because I will take longer to deliver my business outcomes. And so if you have an invite into the conversation by the person who could be most embarrassed by the implications, that might be another thread to pull on.
It does, yes, I agree, Jonathan, that all helps. One of the cultural challenges can be still if the risk teams that you're working with don't have any incentive about your delivery dates, then what can happen is gold plating what really is needed. And too often we see teams that insist on resolutions which aren't in the regulation and aren't actually necessary for the particular context of the thing that's being deployed. It's just what was written in a standard at one time, and therefore it must happen. And and gold plating without any incentive to actually achieve business outcomes is, requires culture change as well.
Any 10-second answer on consequence model in that scenario, what your recommended consequence model is?
Well, the incentive model is to partner the safety team with the value stream at a leadership level. So if the safety team is invited in and effectively is forming an extended leadership team for the value stream, that partnership can actually be quite powerful, because in truth the tech leaders or the product leaders don't want to cause risk to the customers, and they want to do the right thing, but they're focused on the date. So trying to make that group function more coherently as a team is the ninja move for us. That's the incentive, trying to get the incentive right.
Thank you.
And I think we're just about on time. Yeah.
I think we are at time. So yeah, thank you, Miles and Tony, for a great session. Really interesting. And thank you everyone who's been here today for all your questions and contributions. Much appreciated.
Yeah, good conversation. Yeah, very nice.
Bye-bye for now.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Catch you in the new year.
Bye.
Bye.